This is your ultimate Toronto real estate guide for 2026. And it's the only playbook you're going to need if you want to get ahead of the market instead of reacting to it. Closing out 2025 and going into 2026, this is not the time to be guessing about Toronto real estate. We'll go through some of the signals that we are already seeing in the market, where rates have been shifting and inventory has been getting distributed. Micro markets across the city are moving at completely different speeds. From the downtown core to the west to the east, even to midtown, we are seeing different properties sell at different rates. In this guide, I'm breaking down the exact strategies that I'm talking about with my buyers and sellers on how to navigate the Toronto real estate market as we head into the new year. What to buy, what to avoid, when to list, and how to navigate a market where the biggest opportunities aren't always obvious. So whether buying, selling, upsizing, downsizing, or finally ready to break into the Toronto real estate market, 2026 is going to reward the people who are ready to plan early and execute with precision. Let's dive into the ultimate Toronto real estate guide for 2026 and set you up to start the year informed, strategic, and multiple steps ahead of your competition. We're going to jump right into this. So how's the market? And this has been an interesting question as we've navigated through 2025. In fact, this is the age-old question that we always get. Overall, I did a quick search on Google and this is what it gave me. How low will they go? House prices are falling. Toronto house prices are falling. GTA new home market collapse keeps getting worse as sales fall off cliff. Only 53 new condo units sold in Toronto in September, and Toronto's housing market still showing no signs of a rebound. It's so interesting when you look at all these negative headlines, and negativity does sell newspapers. We will talk about all of these in depth as we go forward here. It has been a 12-month roller coaster for Toronto real estate, for real estate in general, and actually just for the world. If we look back at what has happened in the last 12 months, even in Canada here, and this is not including different wars that are happening around the world as well, those have been ongoing for even longer than 12 months. But as we've started, basically 12 months from today, we're closing in here at middle of November, November the 15th. New down payment rules came into effect December 2024, and we won't talk about that too much today. There's lots of details on my YouTube channel about that, but essentially, in a nutshell, the down payment no longer has to be 20% over $1 million. That's now changed to 1.5 million. There was a new president announced in the USA in Q1. Tariffs were implemented. Team Canada, if you're a hockey fan, Team Canada did win the Four Nations Face-Off in February of 2025. That was pretty awesome, amazing hockey. We did get a new prime minister in Canada. There's been a trade war basically ever since. The stock market did crash in April for a short period of time. And if you have been following the stock market, that has definitely rallied throughout the rest of 2025. Interest rates have been on the decline all year. In fact, we're starting to see rates that are basically the lowest we've seen in 4 or 5 years. There's been some interesting news when it comes to some of the brokerages here in Ontario. There was a big RECO, which is our governing body, and iPro, a big issue. That all happened this year. And highest condo inventory we have ever seen, basically at the midpoint of this year, which we will discuss today. Interest rates at their lowest that we've seen in 4 years. We discussed, we just hit another low here as we've gone through the month of October. Prices have hit 2019 levels in some markets, and Blue Jays made it to Game 7 of the World Series, probably some of the best baseball I've ever watched. Even if you're not a huge baseball fan, that was absolute must-see TV. So essentially, 12-month roller coaster in the world, and as mentioned before, there's also other tragic things happening around the world. But this is basically a list of 15 items here of other things as well. Now, if we talk about how's the market, and as we've gone through and seen different things happen throughout the market here, if we talk about how's the market and different things that we've been seeing as the market's gone through here. On the ground level in 2025, there's a few things here that we've seen, and I did go a little more in depth for October next. Overall, throughout the year, smaller condos have been slower than larger condos, unless they're priced super aggressively and the presentation 10 out of 10. Larger condos with parking have been moving under that $1 million mark, and that also has been a different factor because there's so many different styles of larger condos, even getting into the luxury space. Bidding wars are still there for some of the best properties and best locations in the area. Semis and detached are selling if they're priced well and showing well, of course, especially in Toronto, this will always be the case. Buyers have been very picky throughout the year, as they should be, and we've been seeing buyers looking for those ideal layouts, renovations, and ideal floor plans. Now, if we take a look at October, and this is for October of 2024, prices down 7% year over year, active listings, highest level ever recorded for an October. And again, we will dive into this in more data as we go forward. Most most sales of any month this year across the city of Toronto. So this is kind of one of those things where we're seeing the highest amount of active listings and now we're seeing the most amount of sales. The biggest reason for that is pricing is down. So as pricing has come down, we're seeing more people start to come back to the market and start to see that it maybe makes sense for them at certain price points to get into the market. We have also seen the most condo sales of any month across the city of Toronto in October. And that is really important as we navigate through here because there are some metrics about the condos we will talk about. Rates are down almost 2% from this time last year. And one of the things that I won't talk about too much as we go forward here, but this is important to note is that generally we get that activity before we see prices increase. So as we start to get some momentum and some sales happening, that's when we usually start to see more activity. And more sales equals generally over time, higher pricing, but we still have to get through a lot of the inventory that's currently on the market. Affordability is at its best than we've seen in the last 5+ years. So a big difference in affordability in the last few years. Lower prices, lower rates, and that months of inventory has decreased across all property types. If you don't know what that is, we're about to get into that. So months of inventory, micro market matters the most. And essentially when we look at this number, this is the absorption rate that we are seeing in various micro markets across the GTA and across Toronto. And when we look at the GTA versus Toronto, they are two totally different markets altogether. And if you've ever been driving in the last little while, especially as we got a little bit of snow last week, traffic is off the charts. So even just going a little bit outside of the city of Toronto, that 15-20 minute drive on a normal day is taking 40 minutes to an hour now in these days. Property types, freehold versus condos, definitely playing a factor, and renovated versus unrenovated. So what exactly is months of inventory? If we're taking the active listings and we're dividing them by the amount of sales, it is giving us a number which we call months of inventory. Essentially, how many properties are selling out of the ones that are for sale. In a seller's market, that's where we see 0 to 2 months of inventory. And that's where those sellers have the upper hand. That's where it is more difficult to negotiate. We generally start to see less choice and properties selling for higher pricing. That's also where we start to see those bidding wars. So anything at 2 months of inventory or below, that's where the bidding wars do come into play, especially in the city of Toronto. We just saw last week a property that had over 25 offers on it. Even in today's market, that property sold for multiple hundreds of thousands of dollars over asking. However, we saw multiple offers on that property because there's really just not a lot of properties in that area and it was priced aggressively as well. So those two factors, but that pocket and certain pockets around the city of Toronto with low inventory, the best properties that do come up, they sell very, very quickly. And we saw that all through the month of September and even into October. As we're taking a look at active listings for number with 4 and sales at 1, 4 months of inventory, that's what we would consider a balanced market. And balanced markets anywhere between that 3 to 5 months of inventory. That's where it's pretty much balanced between buyers and sellers. Terms are being negotiated on both sides. Maybe a buyer wants a certain closing date or a seller wants a certain closing date. Maybe the price is a little more negotiable on that front as well. What's included in the property. Properties are still selling in those hot areas because those areas generally don't really ever get to a balanced market or 4 months of inventory. Those great areas and great properties are still selling quickly across the board. And I would also say that if it's a great property in an area that maybe is not as desirable or maybe doesn't have the very tight months of inventory, the best properties are still finding ways to sell if they're priced accordingly here in 2025. And I anticipate the same as we go into 2026. Now, if we're in the 6 months of inventory range, and this is where condos have pretty much been sitting throughout the course of the year, buyers generally have the upper hand. It's usually easier to negotiate. There's definitely more choice. And if you've taken a look on the market and across the board, actually, if you just take a look on Realtor.ca and try to see some of the properties available, there's definitely a lot of choice out there. And there are properties that are taking longer to sell. What we do know is that as these months of inventory is at around 6, that's where we get into the buyer territory. And depending on the property type and the micro market, it really could change from a blanket statement of just a months of inventory perspective. So what does that look like if we're looking at 0 and 1 bedroom condos? So 0 bedroom condo obviously is a studio. 1 bedroom condo is a 1 bedroom condo, of course. Now, if we're taking a look, and this is KPI, so basically this is giving us two different numbers here. So this is the amount of active listings and the amount of sales. So active listings, 1,242 amongst 0 and 1 bedroom condos. I've sandwiched them together just for the sake of explaining kind of what we've been seeing. They're now at 6.24 months of inventory. And I did a similar strategy session in April, which was about 6-7 months ago, and that was over 8. So we've definitely seen that months of inventory come down. And you can see here, where those active listings were way up here at the start of 2025, and the number of sales were pretty much in line with kind of where they are now. But right now, 1,240 active listings, 211 sales. You might be wondering why so much inventory came off. Although we'll never get the full story, but I would anticipate that a lot of those units, the 0 and 1 bedroom condos that weren't selling, have turned into rental inventory. We've actually seen in the first 3 quarters of the year some of the highest amount of rental volume we have ever seen for the city of Toronto. So we've really seen rentals come up, and I believe a lot of that is the old inventory that was on the market and now it's turned into rentals. So that inventory's come down and we're seeing that sales activity start to pick up a little bit. The high point of the year was basically in May for condos, and we're starting to trend towards that as we go through here into the last couple months of the year. If we're taking a look at 2-bedroom condos, that is at 5.3 months of inventory. So that's also starting to get more into balanced territory from, if you look back at the start of or into the first few months of 2025, there were over 1,400 listings at that time, and we're hovering around about 500 sales. This time around, now that we're in through November, we're at 3,000 active listings. Sorry, that wasn't 1,400. That was almost 4,000 active listings here at the peak of the year. Now we're hovering around 3,100 active listings and 580 sales, which gives us about 5.3. So we are in balanced territory for the 2-bedroom condos. Trending, I mean, it's trending downwards. So in fact, we might head into just more balance as we close out the year. But as we've seen in different areas and different times, that months of inventory was definitely not as pronounced as we've seen this year, especially in the first few months of 2025. That's compressed again. I do feel it's the same story that we saw even last year at this time, when the inventory really started to go down here especially for 2 bedrooms, and then it increased throughout the year. If you check out my video that talks about what to expect the next 6 months, I do anticipate a very similar story. This chart is almost exactly the same as we've seen the last couple of years. Let's take a look at Toronto semis. And Toronto semis are, without a doubt, the hottest property type in the city of Toronto. There's 2 reasons for that. The first one is that they are generally the next step. So if you do own a condo or you're renting a condo and want to get into the next property, for most buyers, that step would be either a townhouse or a Toronto semi. There's pretty much 3 or 4 different styles that are so typical, and the layouts are almost pretty much identical across the board. 3 bedrooms upstairs with a bathroom, living room, dining room, kitchen on the main level. Bonus if there's a powder room, and in the basement, usually the second bathroom, full bathroom, laundry, and a living space. That is the most typical Toronto semi you will find in the city, and they perform extremely, extremely well. Overall, we're at 1.89 months of inventory, which definitely keeps things in very much a seller's market. And sale to list price is at 109%. And what that tells us is that most of the properties that are selling over asking, almost 10%, well, they're 9% over asking sale price to list price. And this is for the month of October, as it's just closed out. So this is not like some random month that I'm picking. This is actual real data that just happened. And if you're watching this a little bit further into the year, I do run all these numbers in the full-on market stats every single month. But we're seeing here, as you can see in the chart, these numbers are going to remain pretty much, I would say, pretty consistent going into the new year, because generally most of the Toronto semis that are renovated and ready to go in the best areas have probably come to market already, September, October. We might not see that many of them as we go into the end of 2025 and into the start of 2026. That's why it's a really good time to plan as you go into 2026, so that you're ready as these properties start coming back to market in the best areas. If we're looking at detached, more of a balanced territory for detached. This is one of the highest months of inventory I've seen in Toronto real estate for detached in quite some time. The ones that are selling though are selling for about 1% over asking, but I'm seeing a lot of them sell under asking as well. The detached market in Toronto performs different than the detached market outside of the city of Toronto, but prices are down quite a bit from last year, and we'll talk about that shortly. But then just looking at the ones that are selling over asking, it's tough to put all that together. But essentially what it means is that the best properties are still getting activity and selling above asking. And if you get one that's, these are averages, of course, if you get one that sells for 10, 15% over the asking price, it will definitely skew the numbers. Same thing with detached, but detached being at 109% is a little more consistent. 101 is basically a rounding area from selling at pretty much list price. So I mentioned the 905 versus the 416. And if you're new to Toronto real estate and just learning that the Greater Toronto Area is not the city of Toronto, and especially when the news articles talk about Toronto real estate, they are talking about the Greater Toronto Area. Only when they say City of Toronto, that's where it's specific to the city. Otherwise, it's the GTA, Greater Toronto Area. They're actually starting to say the GTHA, which also factors in Hamilton. We're talking almost a hour and a half, 2-hour driving radius to the city. So it's quite expansive. And essentially anything without a Toronto address is what we call the 905. For the detached market, 3.9 months of inventory, city of Toronto. In the 905, 4.6. Semis, 3.1. And this is city of Toronto wide. So, and this also includes rows and townhouses. So in the last chart when I was talking just about semis, that was semi-specific. Once we add in rows and townhouses, it does bring the numbers up a little bit. 905, 3.7, and condo apartments, 5.4, and the 905 at 6.4 months of inventory. So condos for the 416 now are starting to get into that balance territory as we discussed. Still very much in a buyer's territory in the 905. Now, when we talk about average prices and what they've done year over year, October to October, definitely different across the board. And this is interesting, is that the detached market, October to October in Toronto is down 9% year over year, 7% in the 905. Semis down 10.5% year over year, 9.8% in the 905. Condos only down 3% year over year, 905 down 10%. And this is an interesting number because it is very different if we look at the 0 and 1 beds versus the 2 beds and bigger properties. So what does it cost to purchase a property in the Greater Toronto Area versus the city of Toronto? I've run the benchmark pricing, and there's a couple things that really stand out here when we're taking a look at these numbers. The first one is the peaks and valleys that we're seeing in the detached and semi-detached numbers. And the peak of the market, February 2022, the benchmark price for a detached was 1.68 million. That benchmark price in October 2025, just under 1.25 million. That's almost basically a $440,000 swing from the peak to where things are at now. One of the notable things is that we are still in and around that, somewhere between that 2020 and 2021 pricing, kind of that mid 2020 range for detached. Similar story for semis. Now we're taking a look at the townhouses and condos. We are more so in effect, kind of in that 2020 price range here, way back in the blue here for condos. And excuse me, for this, I meant 2021 pricing, not 2020. And essentially for the townhouses, again, similar story. We're kind of in that 2021 pricing, but condos we're down to see, we're in and around that end of 2020, kind of in line with start of 2020 pricing. And the peaks and valleys are much less for the townhouses and for the condos. As you can see, we've been kind of flat here as we've gone through 2024 through now we're closing in on the end of 2025, and definitely a bit of a slide here as we've gone. And that's about a 10% drop GTA wide. And for townhouses, about pretty similar, give or take. Now, if we're looking at City of Toronto proper, detached pricing 1.96 in February 2022, 1.481 in October 2025. So that's about almost a $500,000 price change from February, the peak, to now. And that peak was almost 4 years ago. And as we keep going forward, this is going to be a very distant memory here as we're 4 years across. But you can still see those peaks and valleys. And actually in the start of 2023 and even the start of 2024, we saw some pretty solid activity when it came to pricing. That ramp up happened really quick. And then we saw the same thing in 2024. Same story for semis. And we look at townhouses and condos. What's interesting is that these did have a bit of a peak, but not nearly as pronounced as what we saw in the detached market. One of the things for Toronto real estate, as the pricing for detached and semis is much higher than condos and townhouses, is that usually the detached and freehold market, so the detached and semis, freehold townhouses, will move before the condo market starts to move. So if you have, for example, if you own a condo and you're looking to get maybe a higher sale price on your condo in order to get to the detached, usually that detached that you're looking to go towards will increase in value faster than your condo will increase in value. And that's something that's really important to use as a strategy metric when considering whether to buy or sell first, and to know exactly your next steps when it comes to strategizing. Now, we have seen pricing fall below that January 2020 mark for condos, 577 in October 2025, 588 in January 2020. And for townhouses, semis, and detached, definitely not the case. It's still higher for all those price points. But condos, we have been seeing a slow skid here in pricing. But if that months of inventory starts to come down, we may see that start to increase as we go. It'll just take a lot of time to get through the condos that are currently on the market. There's a really good amount of inventory out there for condos, as we saw earlier, is about 1,400 condo listings for across the board in the city of Toronto. So what does those numbers actually mean if you're looking on a monthly basis? Well, I took the average price, a little bit different than the benchmark price, but if we look at the average price, October 2024 to October 2025, and I just plug these numbers in on an online calculator there. Average price down about 10% year over year. It's about $178,000 change last year to this year. Interest rates down 1.85%. And of course, there's different rates out there. This is just kind of the average that I found on this website here. Monthly payment down $2,300 a month last year versus this year. So if you are looking at a detached property, for example, that property would have costed on a monthly basis, not only on the purchase price, but also on a monthly basis, $2,300 a month more on the average detached property. If we look at semis, relatively similar story, down about 5.3% last year to this year. Average price last year for a semi, 1.3. This year, about 1.23. Interest rates down 1.85% as discussed. And that monthly payment down $1,400 a month last year versus this year. These are pretty material numbers as we've gone through the year. Interest rates keep coming down. Average prices have come down. Now we're starting to see that monthly payment really play a big factor in that affordability cost, because $1,400 a month or even that $2,300 a month is certainly material compared to just $100 or $200 a month. Same story for townhouses and row houses. Average price down about $60,000 year over year, and interest rates down, as we discussed. Monthly payment down $1,270 last year versus this year for townhouses. Now we look at condos, down on average about 3%. That interest rate and the monthly payment also down about $700 a month. So if you do have a condo fee, for example, this would almost eat up most of the condo fee and possibly even property taxes, depending on the size of property. Usually on this average price condo, right now we're seeing this in and around. You can get a really solid 1+ den with parking, a 2-bedroom maybe without parking. You could maybe swing a 2-bedroom with parking depending on the building and layout, of course. But if you're looking for example, a 1+ den with parking in the city of Toronto, this is more than likely going to be kind of where you're going to land. And that monthly payment now, $700 a month. So on that property, that's probably about 750 square feet. If the average condo fee is in around 85 cents a square foot, plus property taxes in around $3,000 a year, that $716 is basically that difference that you would pay on a monthly basis last year versus this year. So really, really great to see the affordability come back into check as the interest rates have come down, and pricing has been hovering and down just a little bit, depends on the property that you're looking at. There are a few checklists, one for buyers and one for sellers, that I've put together. And these are super important checklists when we're factoring in what exactly we're anticipating as we go forward and what we've seen throughout 2025. I do anticipate 2026 to be very similar, and really a good time to plan for your 2026 move is now. Actually, it's sooner than later, because we're going to talk about how much time it takes as we go through here. First up, pre-approval. I always talk about the pre-approval. Essentially, getting a really good understanding of what you can afford, what your basically what your pre-approval can get you in the market. So if you come and say that you're looking for a certain property type, that pre-approval will usually dictate a few elements on that property type. Location, for example, level of renovations, different areas, that kind of stuff. The other piece of, in order to get the best deal, sellers do want to know that you have that pre-approval ready. So having your financing in check will definitely give you the ability to get the best deal possible in any market. So knowing that you have your financing ready is one extra box that we could check off the list as we're moving forward to find you that property. Having a plan and strategy, what's happening in the market you want to move to. And this is one of those things where if you're currently owning a property and you need to sell and then looking to buy versus if you're currently renting and looking to buy, knowing exactly the strategy for each of them is definitely something that we need to factor in. And then also knowing what's happening in the market that you want to move to. Timing your next move. So example, timing your move versus trying to time the market. There is never a perfect time to buy real estate unless you look back and maybe have just pinpointed that time perfectly, but it's very rare that that happens. So timing your next move is more important. Do you need to get into a certain area for work, for kids, for kindergarten, for schools, for whatever the next move is in your life or the next event in your life that you're looking to make this move for is more important than trying to time the absolute bottom of the market. We never know what the bottom of the market is until it's 4, 5, 6 months out. And the other note to that is it sometimes turns faster than anyone could expect. So if things do change and all of a sudden the market starts moving again and more buyers start to come back because the properties or they're realizing a lot of the stuff that we're talking about today, then essentially the market could start moving, and trying to time it perfectly is so difficult to do. I also recommend getting out to see property. What do you like? What do you not like? Narrowing that down so that when that property does come up that's perfect and checks your boxes, you're ready to make a move on it without delay on there. Tune out the media. Not everything is slow. We are seeing most of the properties in the best areas in Toronto in September, October sold within 7 days. And we saw this so consistently, multiple offers on properties, tons of showing activity in those hot pockets of the city. They have been moving. So the media is taking a general approach. They're talking Greater Toronto Area. I can promise you that a property selling in High Park of Toronto is going to perform differently than a property that's 2 hours away, closer to one of the other cities or in some farmland in the GTA. Definitely a different market. So knowing exactly what the media is talking about and pinpointing that exact area, super important. Here I wrote, the discount is on the 2022 price. And the reason I say that is, of course, the goal when working with buyers is to find the best price possible and to negotiate the best price possible. But we really need to factor in that a lot of the properties that are coming to market, if you're a buyer and you're out there, you already know what things have been selling for the property type that you're looking at and the property that you're aspiring to get to. We're generally starting to see a lot of that. The pricing's already been worked throughout the year. So we know if a property's coming to market, is it at market value or is it overpriced? If it's something's at market value for today, we're generally finding that if it shows well, it presents really well, and it's priced where it should be in November of 2025, it's usually selling pretty quickly. And that tells us that if it's priced at this price for today, there may not be a ton of wiggle room on that price. And we have to look back at the history of that price and what would have sold for in 2022. What does that look like on a full-on perspective? Because that's where the discount is, was that property a couple $100,000 more expensive back in 2022? And now we're seeing it at 2025 pricing going into 2026. If it's priced really well, looks really great in a great area, I can assure you it's going to sell either where it should sell for, whether that's at market value, maybe bidded up on a bidding war perspective. It really depends. But buyers are already out there, and it's really tough to get a very significant discount if it's priced where it should be in 2025. Most buyers pick 2 of 3: location, property, and price. So if you have a budget and a certain budget and you're looking for a specific area, generally you're picking 2 of 3. If you want the best location and the best property, I can promise you you're probably going to pay the best price. If you want a discount on the price and you want the best location, that property is going to most certainly need some work. And if you're okay to sacrifice on location, you will get a really great property at a really great price. And that's typically the buyer triangle. So pick 2 of those 3: location, property, and price. If you do have a budget. If you have unlimited budget, then of course you could be more picky and choose all three ideally. The goal is to get as close to all three as we can. But generally, we find, especially in the city of Toronto, these are typically 100-year-old houses, that most buyers will pick two of three. And the last piece I will mention for buyers, decisive buyers have been absolutely winning in 2025, and they certainly will in 2026. The buyers that know exactly what they're looking for, location that they're looking for, have their budget ready to go, and all the details worked out are definitely winning because they're getting into property before anyone else, and they're making those moves as everyone else is sitting on the sidelines or trying to figure out their next steps. Having that decision where it's a no rush plan, we've strategized really well, we have all those ducks in a row, will give you the best chance of success and definitely the best chance at getting the best price in the best areas. So having all those ducks set up in a row early will certainly set you up for that plan. And I was just discussing at the start of this of what that timing looks like. If you currently are renting your property and you are looking to make a move, generally that process between our initial first call and making that move is usually 3 to 6 months. If you're a buyer who also has something to sell, that process usually takes about 5 to 8 months. It takes some time to prepare your property for sale, get everything ready, and then also get out there in the market and find what you're looking for. That process also includes, for example, things like getting your pre-approval ready and the closing time. So if it's 60 or 30, 60, 90 days, for example, for closing, or if you're selling and you want that 120 days to closing, we need to factor that in that timeline. That's where it's either 5 to 8 months if you are a buyer and a seller, or it's usually 3 to 6 months if you are currently in a rental and looking to make that purchase. Of course, it can happen on different timelines, but I find those are the most average. Checklist for sellers and going into 2026, plan and strategy. What is your next move? Are you selling to purchase something else? Are you selling to move? Are you selling to downsize? Are you selling a condo to upsize into a house? All those factors. Having a clear-cut plan, as we discussed the timeline, think 5 to 8 months out. If you're selling a condo to get into the best school district going into the summer of 2026, we are now currently about 9 months out as of recording this video. So knowing what that looks like so we can plan accordingly. So you're 5 steps ahead. And I really tend to go by the no rush plan. We want to take our time to strategize properly to give you the best chance at getting the best price on the sale and the best price on the purchase. Presentation. How does your property look and feel when buyers come in? It's not enough to just look really good online and then someone comes through and they're a little bit let down when they get into the door. We need to promote in a way that will get buyers to your property, marketing on Max, which we're going to talk about. But then the next thing is, how does the property feel when buyers come in? Is there a feeling of hominess? Is there a feeling of emotion where they're instantly going to fall in love with your property? That is the difference between a property selling right now and maybe not selling or sitting for longer. If 1 in 3 or 1 in, depending if you're going to a semi or a detached or a condo, if 1 in basically, let's call it 5 are selling, how do we become that 1 in 5? Generally, presentation when they get to the door is ultra important. Maintenance and staging. So once we talk about presentation, of course, staging is a big factor on that. The property needs to look and feel amazing. I totally understand that staging sometimes removes some of the personality of a property, but we are trying to appeal to a certain demographic, and knowing exactly what that staging is or who it's appealing to, we need to know exactly who the buyers are for that property and stage accordingly so that it looks really, really impeccable. Maintenance, generally, if it's a freehold property, we would run a home inspection, or if just walking through, we can see, does it need paint? Do we need to also factor in different elements of like any repairs, any walls painted, any lighting, all those different things. Maintenance, getting it fully maintained, ready to go so that from a buyer's perspective, they want to do the least amount of work possible. And if 2 properties are relatively equal and one has all the typical maintenance done and it's really kept really well and the other one has a ton of maintenance to do, buyers right now will certainly take the one that needs the less amount of work. Marketing to the ultra max. We're not even going to call this max. We're going to call this ultra max. Pro photography. Now, there's a lot of photographers offering professional photography and video and stuff. It needs to be way better than just your generic pro photography and average video. We need all the stops pulled, all the unlimited amounts of video that can just bring more buyers to see your property. We're talking different formats for YouTube, for Instagram, for TikTok, for YouTube Shorts. We also need different elements. We need some AI elements in there to make sure that all of the marketing is working like a really solid oiled machine. Video, print marketing, website, social media, open houses, all of it, all of it, all of it. There is no shortcuts going into 2026. A lot of that property that has come off the market may also come back. So you still want to be looking very, very fresh. Price strategy, of course, it's based on different factors. Months of inventory for your property location, super important. Other options that are on the market that buyers are going to compare your property to, because when we do have inventory, that's what buyers are doing. They are comparing to your property. So knowing exactly what that looks like determines which pricing strategy to go with. That's where we guide you on, for example, what we're seeing, where to price, where we feel that market value is, but also how to attract the most amount of buyers to your property. Price is definitely everything in 2025. It's going to continue the same in 2026, no doubt. This is also not time to really test the market in order to get what you could have got 2022 pricing. If you're a seller and you've owned your property for more than 5 years, you would have seen that 2022 pricing as you currently owned your property. And I'm sure you would have had an idea of what that value of that property would have been at that peak time. We are 4 years almost from that time. So we need to really be mindful of where the pricing is at today in 2025 and going into 2026. So that way, once your property gets to market, it has the appeal because buyers have been generally out there longer than sellers get to the market. So the buyers are going to know right away, is your property priced where it should be, or is it overpriced, and it will be a comparable for them. It's not really time to test the market as we go into 2026. But if you are serious about selling because you have another plan that you want to execute, and we always think of like a full 360 plan when going towards those steps, super important to know what that plan is, strategy accordingly, so that way we can really maximize your sale price, get the most amount of dollars we can on the sale, and try to negotiate the best price we can on the buy. There you have it. That is the strategy for 2025 going into 2026. I have just attached this QR code down below. So if you do want to have a New Year's strategy session, we are booking in throughout the rest of 2025 and into 2026 to really strategize and create a plan going into the new year so that you're never in that rush feeling. I've attached the links right here. You can scan that QR code. You can click on the links down below when this gets reposted, or just do a quick search, Michael Ouzas Real Estate. There's tons of options on how you'll be able to connect. But overall, you can book in a New Year's strategy session at a time that works for you. I'm Michael Ouzas. Thanks for watching.